You've probably heard the story. Phone. Bad news. Ancient alarm system firing in your brain. No off switch. It's compelling. It might even be mostly right, but the version you know is missing something. And that gap matters more than the story itself. The mainstream understanding goes roughly like this. The amygdala, a small, almond-shaped structure buried in the temporal lobe, is your brain's primary threat detector. It evolved to respond to immediate physical danger, a predator, a stranger moving too fast, a sound that doesn't belong in the dark. The problem, the story goes, is that the modern news environment exploits this system. Headlines are engineered to feel urgent. Negative events get more coverage than positive ones. Not because journalists are malicious, but because the brain's negativity bias makes threatening information stickier, more attention-capturing, more shareable. So when you scroll through a continuous feed of disasters, injustices, and crises, your amygdala can't distinguish between a news alert and an actual threat. It fires anyway. And if you do this for hours a day, every day, the theory is that your threat detection system gets stuck in a kind of chronic low-grade activation, hyperarousal, anxiety, a persistent sense that something bad is about to happen. Researchers have linked heavy negative news consumption to elevated anxiety, depression symptoms, and what some have called headline stress disorder. Studies show that people who consume more negative news report worse psychological well-being. The causal logic seems intuitive. The neuroscience sounds solid. And honestly, parts of it probably are. But there's a gap in this argument that almost nobody talks about. Here's where it gets more complicated. Almost every study on doomscrolling measures one of two things: self-reported negative news consumption or total screen time. Then it looks for correlations with anxiety, depression, or psychological distress. And those correlations exist, they're real. But correlations between self-reported behavior and self-reported mental state have a fundamental measurement problem. One the field doesn't always acknowledge clearly enough. Nobody in these studies is actually measuring amygdala activation. A POLAF MRI brain scan displayed on a monitor in a dark research lab. Warm glow of the screen, no person visible see. Not in real time, not during scrolling. The vivid neuroscience. The amygdala hijack. The threat circuitry lighting up. The system getting stuck is mostly being inferred from a behavioral pattern and mapped onto brain structures we understand from a different body of research entirely. This is what you might call a translation problem. We have solid laboratory evidence that the amygdala responds to threatening images and emotionally charged stimuli. We have imaging studies showing that negative emotional content drives stronger amygdala responses than neutral content. That research is credible and well replicated. But the leap from threatening images activate the amygdala in a scanner to 30 minutes of scrolling Twitter produces clinically meaningful hyperarousal that degrades your mental health over time. That leap involves several assumptions that haven't been directly tested. Does the amygdala habituate to repeated low-intensity news stimuli the way it habituates to other repeated stimuli? We don't have a clean answer. Does the arousal from doom scrolling persist after the phone goes down? Or does it resolve quickly the way most emotional responses do? The evidence is mixed. Is the anxiety that correlates with heavy news consumption caused by the news? Or do people who are already anxious scroll more, seeking some form of information control? That last question is the uncomfortable one, and several researchers have started asking it. A 2020 study looked at news consumption during a period of acute public stress and found that heavier news exposure did predict worse mental health outcomes, but the relationship was significantly moderated by pre-existing anxiety sensitivity. People who already scored high on anxiety sensitivity before the stressful period were much more affected by news exposure than those who didn't. The news wasn't acting on a neutral brain. It was interacting with a brain that was already primed. That's not a minor footnote. That's a different model of what's happening. Separately, research on media use and emotional regulation has found something that complicates the simple amygdala hijack narrative. Some people, under some conditions, use negative news consumption as a form of worry engagement, a way of feeling like they're doing something about an uncontrollable situation. For these individuals, the news scroll isn't purely passive threat exposure. It's active, if dysfunctional, coping. The brain circuitry involved in worry and rumination, which overlaps with the prefrontal cortex and the default mode network, may be at least as relevant as the amygdala. There's also a dose problem. The studies that find the strongest associations between news consumption and distress tend to measure consumption during unusually high-stress news periods, elections, pandemics, acute crises. Whether those findings generalize to ordinary ambient doom scrolling on a Tuesday is genuinely unclear. The evidence suggests the effect is probably real, but the size of the effect under normal conditions may be considerably smaller than the most alarming headlines imply. What does appear to be well supported is this. For a subset of the population, particularly those with pre-existing anxiety, high intolerance of uncertainty, or trauma histories, repeated exposure to threatening news content does appear to produce measurable psychological effects that go beyond ordinary stress. The amygdala is almost certainly involved. So is the anterior cingulate cortex, which plays a role in conflict monitoring and uncertainty processing. So is the default mode network during the rumination that follows. The brain signature of doom scrolling, to the extent we can sketch it, is probably not just one structure firing repeatedly. It's more likely a network-level pattern. One that's harder to visualize on a diagram, but closer to what the evidence actually shows. And the evidence does not yet tell us how much of the harm comes from the content itself versus the displacement of activities. Sleep, exercise, face-to-face interaction that would otherwise regulate the nervous system. Our dat was planned slinen furtherly. So what does this actually mean if you're someone who finds yourself scrolling at midnight through things that upset you? It probably means the simple story. Your amygdala is broken. The news broke it. Isn't quite right, and knowing that might actually be useful. If your relationship with negative news is entangled with anxiety you already carry, then the scroll isn't the root of the problem. It's a symptom with its own feedback loop. The news amplifies the anxiety. The anxiety drives more searching. The searching produces more anxiety. That loop is real. But cutting off the news without addressing the underlying anxiety sensitivity is a bit like turning off a smoke alarm without looking for the fire. If you're using the scroll as a form of control, a way of monitoring an uncontrollable world, then what you're actually training yourself to do is associate relief with information intake, which doesn't resolve the distress so much as defer it. And if you're someone who scrolls heavily but doesn't actually feel worse afterward, you're not broken either. The evidence suggests individual variation in this response is substantial. Not every brain responds to this stimulus the same way. The more honest frame isn't the news is hijacking your amygdala. It's closer to your nervous system is interacting with an information environment it wasn't designed for. And the effects of that interaction depend heavily on what you already bring to it. Here's where I'll be honest about what we don't know. The research on doom scrolling and brain function is still relatively young, and much of it is correlational. The neuroscience framing, the amygdala story, is probably not wrong, exactly. It's more that it's incomplete in ways that matter for how we understand the problem and what we do about it. There's a version of this research that matures over the next decade and confirms that chronic negative news exposure does produce lasting changes in threat sensitivity. There's another version where we find that the effect is mostly mediated by pre-existing vulnerability and behavioral displacement, and the amygdala narrative turns out to have been a useful but somewhat misleading simplification. I genuinely don't know which version wins. What I find harder to dismiss is the basic observation that the information environment has changed faster than the nervous system's ability to adapt to it, and that we're all, in some sense, running an experiment on ourselves without a clear sense of the results. The research behind this video draws from peer-reviewed journals. Every claim traces to a published source. Full citations are in the description below. If the way this channel thinks about neuroscience resonates with you, subscribing helps this work reach people who'd appreciate it. New videos on the science of mind every week.